who you're becoming and why it scares you. You can feel it, can't you? Something in you is changing, and no matter how much you try to explain it, you can't quite put it into words. You just know you're not the same. The way you think is different. The way you see things is different. What you tolerated, what you desire, what you're available for, it's all shifting. And at the same time, there's a part of you that feels unsettled, maybe even a little scared. Not because something is wrong, but because something is ending and something new is trying to come through you. And the truth is, you're not just changing your habits. You're not just changing your behavior. You're changing your identity. And identity shifts don't happen quietly. They don't happen neatly. They move through you. They disrupt you. They ask you to release what no longer fits before you fully understand what's coming next. And that space where you don't fully recognize yourself, that's where most people stop because it feels uncertain. It feels unfamiliar. It feels like you're losing something without knowing what you're gaining. But you're not losing yourself. You're shedding who you're not. And I want you to really hear this part because this is where everything changes. You're not breaking. You are remembering. Remembering the version of you that existed before you learned to shrink, before you learned to overgive, before you learned to question yourself, before you learned to become who you need to be, to feel safe. And that version of you is coming back online, not softly, not subtly, powerfully. And that's why it feels intense, because the version of you that is emerging is not available for the life you've been living, not available for the same dynamics, not available for the same patterns, not available for the same level of self-abandonment. And that creates friction between who you've been and who you're becoming. And that friction, that's what you're feeling right now. Not confusion, not chaos, expansion. And I know part of you wants clarity, wants to understand exactly what's happening, wants to feel grounded again. But this isn't a phase you think your way through. This is a phase you move through. And I'm going to guide you through exactly that. Now, before we go deeper, just take a breath. And if you're here, if this is landing, if something in your body is saying, yes, this is me, make sure you hit subscribe and tap the notification bell. Because this space, this is where you don't just understand your evolution, you embody it. Now let's go deeper into who you're actually becoming and why it feels so uncomfortable. You don't need to figure out who you're becoming. A part of you already knows. It's just been quiet, covered, conditioned out of you, but it's still there. And that's the part of you you've been feeling recently. The part of you that doesn't want to over-explain anymore, doesn't want to shrink to keep the peace, doesn't want to keep saying yes when it means no. The part of you that pauses now, where you used to automatically react. Part of you that notices things you used to ignore. The part of you that feels misaligned, even when everything looks fine on the surface. That's not you becoming difficult. That's you becoming clear. Because the version of you that is emerging is not built on survival. It's built on truth. Truth is how you speak. Truth in what you accept. Truth in what you're available for. And truth doesn't always feel comfortable because truth disrupts patterns. It disrupts the version of you that kept everything smooth by abandoning yourself. And that's why this shift feels so big, because you're not just changing what you do, you're changing what you tolerate. You're becoming someone who feels things fully, but doesn't quite collapse into them, see things clearly and doesn't pretend otherwise, knows what's right for them and doesn't override it. And that version of you moves differently. They don't rush to respond. They don't overgive to prove their worth. They don't shape themselves to fit into spaces that don't meet them. They stand in something deeper, something quieter, something more grounded. And that can feel unfamiliar because if you've spent years being the one who adapts, the one who softens, the one who keeps everything together, then becoming someone who holds their ground feels like a completely different identity. And this is the truth most people don't say out loud. Becoming your true self will feel unfamiliar at first, not because it's wrong, but because it's new to your system. And this is where Energy Body 4, the neutral mind, comes in again. Because instead of questioning it, instead of doubting it, instead of trying to shrink it back down, you observe it. This feels different. This feels unfamiliar. This feels like something I haven't been before. And instead of turning away from that, you stay, because the version of you that is emerging is not something you need to create. It's something you're allowing. And the more you allow it, the more it stabilizes. The more it becomes natural, the more it becomes you. Now let's talk about the part you don't always say out loud. This version of you, the one that's emerging, the one that feels more grounded, more honest, more self-led, it scares you. And not in a dramatic way, not in a way that feels more obvious, in a quiet way, a subtle hesitation, a moment where you feel yourself pull back, even though you know it's right. And you might have questioned that. Why does this feel uncomfortable if it's aligned? Why do I feel resistance if this is what I want? Why does something that feels true always feel scary? And I need you to hear this properly. It's not scary because it's wrong. It's scary because it changes everything. Because becoming this version of you means you can't go back to who you were. And that's where the fear actually is. Not in becoming, but in what you have to leave behind. Because this version of you doesn't tolerate what you used to tolerate. Doesn't stay silent where you used to stay quiet. Doesn't overgive where you used to overextend. And that means some dynamics change. Some relationships shift. Some version of your life no longer fits. And your system feels that. It recognizes, if I fully step into this, everything recalibrates. And that creates fear. Not because you're incapable, but because you're stepping into something irreversible. And your nervous system prefers reversible. It prefers familiar, predictable, controlled, even if that familiar version of your life isn't fully aligned. So when you step into something new, something more honest, something more true, your system goes, wait, this is different. This is unknown. This could change everything. And it tries to slow you down. Not because it's against you, but because it's trying to protect you. And this is where most people misinterpret themselves. They think this fear means I'm not ready. This discomfort means something is wrong. This hesitation means I should wait. No, this fear means you're stepping into something real. Something that requires you to be more present, fully honest, fully yourself. And that's not something your system is used to yet. So instead of seeing the fear as a stop sign, see it for what it actually is, a threshold, a moment where you're being asked, are you willing to become this version of yourself, even if it feels unfamiliar? And this is where Energy Body 4, the neutral mind, holds you again. Because instead of reacting to the fear, instead of collapsing back into what's comfortable, you observe it. This is fear. This is my system adjusting. This doesn't mean I should stop. And when you can hold fear without letting it dictate your behavior, you move through it. And on the other side of that is the version of you that no longer questions their truth. There's a moment in every identity shift where something becomes undeniable. You realize you can't be who you were anymore. Not because you don't want to, but because it no longer fits. And I'm not talking about a dramatic, obvious moment. I'm talking about the quiet ones, where you tried to respond the way you used to, and it feels false, where you try to go along with something, and something in you resists, where you try to shrink, soften, or adjust, and your body just doesn't let you. That's the turning point, because something in you has changed. Your awareness has expanded, and once your awareness expands, you can't unknow what you now know. You can't unsee the misalignment. You can't unfeel what no longer sits right. You can't go back to being unaware. And that's why going back feels so uncomfortable now, because you're trying to fit into something that your system has already outgrown. And this is where people get stuck, because instead of accepting that shift, they try to force themselves back into what's familiar. They think, maybe I'm overthinking. Maybe I'm being too sensitive. Maybe I should just go back to how I was. But let's be real for a second. You're not overthinking. You're seeing clearly. You're not being too sensitive. You're becoming more aware. And you don't need to go back. You need to move forward, because the discomfort you feel when you try to go back is your system telling you this isn't you anymore. And that can feel confronting, because moving forward means letting go of old identities, letting go of old dynamics, letting go of old ways of being, even if those things once felt safe. And this is where the neutral mind becomes your anchor again. Because instead of arguing with yourself, instead of questioning your awareness, you recognize the truth. I've outgrown this. And you let that be enough. No justification, no over-explaining, no convincing yourself otherwise. Just clarity. Because once you accept that you can't go back, you stop trying. And all that energy you were using to force yourself backwards becomes available to move you forward. And that's where things start to shift. Not because you suddenly have all the answers, but because you're no longer resisting the direction you're already moving in. Now we're going to move this out of your mind and into your body, because this version of you that's emerging isn't something you think your way into. It's something you step into. So if you can, sit comfortably, feet on the ground, back supported. Let your shoulders soften. Take a slow breath in through your nose and a long breath out through your mouth. Again, slow inhale, long exhale. Let your body start to settle. Now bring your awareness into your chest, not forcing anything, just noticing. And I want you to bring to mind the version of you you've been feeling recently, not the old version, the new one, the one that feels more grounded, more honest, more self-led, less available for what's no longer aligns. You don't need to have a perfect image, just a sense, a feeling, and notice how that version of you holds themselves, their energy, their posture, their presence. Now gently ask yourself, how does this version of me move? Not what they do, how they move. Do they rush or do they pause? Do they over-explain? Or do they speak simply? Do they collapse? Or do they stay grounded? Just observe. Now bring your awareness back to your body and begin to subtly shift into that energy. Let your spine lengthen slightly. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breath slow down. Nothing forced. Just a small adjustment. Now place one hand on your chest and say internally, I can hold this version of me. Let that land, because this isn't about becoming someone else. It's about allowing what's already there to stabilize. Take another breath and say, I don't need to go back to feel safe. Feel how your body responds, because this is new. Your system is learning that it can exist here without collapsing. Now imagine yourself moving through your life as this version of you, in conversations, in decisions, in moments where you would have gone back before. And notice what changes, not dramatically, subtly. You pause instead of reacting. You choose instead of defaulting. You stay instead of shrinking. And that's how identity shifts, not in big, overwhelming leaps, but in small, embodied moments like this. Take one more slow breath and just feel into this version of you, because you're not something you need to find. Because you're not something you need to find. You're something you're already becoming. Now gently bring your awareness back. Feel your body. Feel your breath. Feel the space around you. And just notice. You didn't need to force anything. You just needed to step into it. Because the more you practice this, the more this version of you becomes natural. Now, this is the part that stabilizes everything. Because you can feel the shift, you can sense the new version of you. You can even step into it for a moment like we just did. But if you don't trust it, you'll question it. And the moment you question it, you start pulling yourself back into overthinking, back into doubt, back into trying to make everything make sense again. So this is where the shift happens. Not in becoming more clear, but in becoming more trusting. Because right now, there are two voices in you. One says, this feels right. And the other says, but what if it's not? And most people follow the second one, not because it's more true, but because it feels safer. Because doubt feels like control. Because doubt feels like control. But the version of you that is emerging doesn't move from doubt. They move from trust. Not blind trust, not forced trust, grounded trust. Trust in what they feel. Trust in what they see. Trust in what no longer aligns. And this is where your identity begins to shift from I don't know if I'm getting this right to I trust who I am becoming. Feel that. It doesn't say I have everything figured out. It says I trust myself to move through this. And that changes everything. Because when you trust who you're becoming, You stop second guessing every shift. You stop questioning every feeling. You stop trying to shrink yourself back into something that feels more certain. Instead, you allow the process. You allow the discomfort. You allow the expansion. You allow the version of you that feels new to stabilize over time. And every time you choose trust over doubt, you reinforce that identity, not through big decisions, but through small moments where you feel something is right and you don't override it, where you sense something is misaligned and you don't just ignore it, where you notice yourself changing. And instead of questioning it, you accept it. And those moments build something powerful. They build self-trust, the kind of trust that doesn't disappear when things feel uncertain, the kind of trust that doesn't collapse when things feel unfamiliar, the kind of trust that allows you to keep moving forward, even when you don't have all the answers. And that's what stabilizes this entire shift. Not clarity, trust. Because the version of you that you're becoming isn't waiting for permission. They're waiting for you to trust them. And in this next part, I want you to feel that I know something just shifted in me feeling, because you're not who you were. And that's the point. So now just take a moment and really feel into this. Everything you've been experiencing, the shifts, the discomfort, the uncertainty, the quiet knowing that something in you is changing, is not random. It's not something you need to fix. It's not a phase you're going through. It's who you're becoming. And I know part of you still wants to understand it, still wants clarity, still wants to feel like you're figuring it out. But this isn't something you figure out. This is something you step into. And the more you try to go back, the more uncomfortable it will feel, because you're not meant to live there anymore. You're already expanding beyond it. And that's why the version of your life that once felt normal now feels misaligned, because you've changed, not in a surface level way, but at your core. And once that shift happens, there's no going back to who you were, only forward into who you're becoming. And I want you to really hear this. You don't need to rush the process. You don't need to rush this process. You don't need to force clarity. You don't need to have everything figured out right now. You just need to stay present, stay grounded, stay with yourself, even when things feel unfamiliar, because that's how this version of you stabilizes. Not through pressure, not through perfection, through presence. And if you know something in you is shifting, but you don't quite know how to hold it yet, because this isn't about finding your way back. It's about learning how to trust, stabilize, and embody the version of you that's already emerging. And if you want to go even deeper, to understand the patterns you're breaking, the identity you're stepping into, and the direction your life is actually moving in, your Numerology Roadmap Breakthrough session will give you that clarity. The link is below in the description box, along with the freebie quick guide to numerology. And before we go, I want you to ask yourself one question. Where am I doubting who I am becoming when I actually know it's real? And this time, don't override it. Don't question it. Just notice it. Because the moment you stop doubting it is the moment you start becoming it. And if you feel comfortable, put it in the comments, because you're not here to go back. You're here to become. And that's where everything shifts. So I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.